Well, good morning. Today we are starting a chapter on hope from Mere Christianity. Next week we are going to cover 2 chapters, and that will be the conclusion of our study on Mere Christianity. The following Wednesday we'll be packing Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. Just a reminder, so there will be no study. And then the Wednesday after that we will launch our study on Ruth and Esther. Please let me know in advance if you need a copy of that book to join us for that study. Well, last night I started this discussion with our class with this. It says, hope is a theological virtue. That's the opening sentence in this chapter. And I noted that this is a profound and true statement. But what does it reveal about naturalism? So the belief that nothing supernatural exists, that God doesn't exist, of course, that we weren't created by anyone for any purpose. Instead, we are a cosmic mistake, and ultimately we will die along with the rest of the heat death of the cosmos. Why doesn't that picture offer a lot of hope? I think it's pretty apparent when you consider that. And I think that hope is a theological hope. It is a theological virtue. It is one that we find grounded within a theological framework, within the assumption and the belief that there is a God, that he loves us, that he's created us for a purpose, that we have eternality, that just because there's physical death does not mean that's the end of the story. And so our lives are marked constantly by life. I've said before that for the unbeliever, everything is tainted by death. Everything that you enjoy. If you drive down the roads today, if you take a trip anywhere, you will see people stopping. I trust out-of-towners largely, but they will stop thinking that they are parked off the road, but very much so still on it. And they will step out of their vehicles to take pictures of the foliage. And I've seen 2 near accidents as a result of this, by the way. So people step out and take pictures of the foliage because it's so beautiful. But what's really happening is that those beautiful leaves are going to be the crunchy sod of early winter here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And so what we're going to see is barren, naked trees. That's what we're going to see in a few weeks. And nobody's going to stop to see that. So even this beautiful season, and I love fall, even with that and everything that we see, really, that is all tainted by death in a fallen world. Everything we love fades away, rusts, or passes. And that's a difficult reality, but it's one that we face in this life. But as we're going to see in this chapter, us Christians, we recognize that the desires that we have, for instance, time with our loved ones, eternal life, these things that we desire, they can be realized. They will be realized for followers of Jesus Christ in eternity to come. And so God has given us desires not to put something just beyond our reach, but instead that we would have a desire that we would understand, that we would come to understand, can only be realized when we are home, when we are in the presence of Jesus Christ. And I do want to say one other note about hope briefly, and that is this. After the 2016 presidential election, the previous First Lady had said in, I think, an interview or had written an article, and she said that now we know what it's like to live without hope. And that was around the Christmas season, and it struck me so powerfully. And not to say anything negatively about her, but rather we find, especially in a presidential campaign year, presidential election year, we find that so many people ground their hope in a presidential election. They ground their hope on what's happening politically, or what's happening in their relationships or financially, whatever it might be. But especially, we find a heightened sense of sort of hopefulness or hopelessness as a result of the election. Now, I care deeply about our country, and I trust you do too. And we should be passionate about the election. We should be passionate about the well-being of our nation in general. But our hope as Christians isn't grounded there. If the presidential candidate you want to win doesn't win, it's not as though God's purpose has been thwarted, or God doesn't have a plan any further, whatever it might be, or his gospel is not going to go forth. That's not the truth. Now, difficult days may come for different groups, depends on your outlook on different things. But when we look at it as followers of Jesus Christ, we need to make sure that our hope is secured somewhere very differently than on the ballot box. And so with that, let's move forward. And I asked, do you agree with the statement? Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither. And what are some examples of those who aimed at heaven? And now this quote is probably the most popular quote of Lewis from this book that's quoted. There's a few that are candidates, but largely, and I think universally, everybody in our group agreed with that statement, that it's true that if you aim at earth, you're not going to get heaven, and in fact, you're going to end up miserable here, because there's nothing here that we ultimately hold. And somebody had mentioned Solomon's example, which is a profound example of this. Somebody who had as much excess as one could possibly have in this life, and yet said that the only thing that really mattered was to know God, to enjoy Him, to worship Him. Everything else was just fleeting. It was vanity, all vanity, he said repeatedly. And then we talked about some examples just briefly of those who aimed at heaven. These aren't people who are perfect. We all fall short of the glory of God. But we have many heroes of the faith, people that we look up to and say, wow, this person really lived for Jesus Christ. And it encourages us, and their lives challenge us. I think of Jim Elliot a good bit, the martyr in Ecuador. I think of Amy Carmichael and her faithful service there in India. And as we think of so many other Christians, there could be people we know personally who have made an impact on our lives who would fit that bill. Now, C.S. Lewis did describe this fact that there are desires that we have in this life that aren't realized here. As I said before, everybody, when they get sick, they have desire to live. Why do they have that desire? Because we have the desire to live forever. That's why. That's a good desire. Now, again, if you look at it just from an earthly perspective, from the flesh sort of side of things, it seems like a cruel desire, doesn't it? That you have this desire to live forever, and yet it's not going to be realized here. So he asks the question, well, how do different people deal with this? And he breaks it down into three classes of people: the fool, the so-called sensible man, and then the Christian. And the fool deals. He asks, how does he deal with excess, or with this desire that's not realized here? And I do want to read part of this. He says, the fool's way: he puts the blame on the things themselves. He goes on all his life thinking that if only he tried another woman, or went for a more expensive holiday, or whatever it is, then this time he really would catch the mysterious something we are all after. Most of the bored, discontented, rich people in the world are this type. They spend their whole lives trotting from woman to woman, through the divorce courts, from continent to continent, from hobby to hobby, always thinking that the latest is the real thing at last, and are always disappointed. This is a sad reality. So many people chase that next wave, that next high, the next experience, hoping that in that they're going to find purpose, they're going to find this kind of joy that they've been craving, that their desires are going to be realized in that, but they never are. Our hope can never be grounded in a vocation, in a spouse, in any other thing that happens in this life. Now, that's not to say that those things do not add benefits to our lives, or that we shouldn't value them. I'm not saying that at all, quite the opposite. I'm saying that when we have our hope grounded in the right place, those things find their proper place, and we enjoy them as part of this story of what God's doing in our lives and through our lives. But so many people just chase after things, and they're never going to find satisfaction there. And he gives the example of celebrities there, and this is a surprising thing when you first come to realize this in your life, that these people who are incredibly wealthy and famous and largely attractive people and successful in their own fields and all these things, that they're quite miserable so often. And not to typecast everybody, but we find so much substance abuse in Hollywood and issues like that. And you wonder, why can't these people be happy? Well, because they're continually, I trust, if we look at just the overriding narrative, perhaps not every individual case, but we find people chasing high after high, experience after experience, relationship after relationship, and grounding their hope in those things. And that can never lead us to a good place. The next is the disillusioned, or so-called sensible man. And this is the person who's come to the place in life where they've said, I've experienced all the joys that life has to offer, and they're all miserable. And there's no sort of hope to be found. Perhaps they've gone through relational strain and they're alone now, or financial hardship, and they say, well, there's nothing to be gained here. There's no hope. The desires that we have are foolish in the first place. So not only are they not going to be realized in eternity to come, but when I was younger, I was dumb enough to think that those desires were good anyways, that I should even have those desires. I've come to sort of numb myself to all of that. And so often people numb themselves, of course, through substances or other means. Well, this is a really devastating place for somebody to be. That should grieve us that anybody would get to such a place, because when we're numb from difficult experiences, of course, we're numb from good ones as well. And we're not open to those things. But also, the bigger issue there is that we're not recognizing that our Creator has indeed instilled those desires within us, and He has a place where He wants us to realize them. And so we're denying ourselves real joy because we are kind of assuming that our own thoughts of what things should be or what they should have been like, that those were proper and right. And anybody who disagrees with us is themselves disillusioned. And then he talks about the Christian way. He says, the Christian way says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other hand, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to the other country and to help others to do the same. Lewis there describes what it means to live as a Christian with desires that are not going to be satisfied here. And he says that's okay. We recognize that these are just a sampling, a shadow of the greater that is to come. We talked last night about things that we desire that can't be fully realized here. And we talked about a sense of belonging, of really being part of a family unit. And of course, I hope that you watching this are from a strong family, but even as strong as our families are, we have a desire to belong with other people and be connected. And here, there's contention, there's jealousy, there's bitterness, there's pride, but in eternity to come, in the presence of Jesus Christ, there's no such thing. So we're going to have a blessed reunion there. We have a desire, of course, for life, and I called this last night kind of the low-hanging fruit, but it's true. We have a desire for life. We want to live forever. We don't want to die. And when the thought of death is presented before us, most people respond very with a lot of anxiety, despair, a lot of hurt, because they want more. They want to live longer. And we have that realized in the presence of Jesus. There are many other desires that will be realized in eternity to come. But I want us to understand that as Christians, that we have real hope. We have real hope because we know Jesus Christ, because our hope is grounded in Him, not just in a place, heaven, but it's grounded in a person and works of Jesus Christ. And so, as followers of Him, we must make sure that our hopes are attached, that our desires are understood in that context, that perhaps there are things we desire that can't be realized here. But that doesn't mean that we don't have hope. It means that we are meant for a better country, and that's the good news as followers of Jesus Christ. Well, I look forward to sharing the upcoming 2 chapters with you next week, and then that will be the conclusion of the study. May God bless you.